Some people aren't born to win. They're not handed pearls or wrapped in silk. They start with nothing, no name, no wealth, no promises, just a fire inside, and a dream too loud to stay silent. Her name was Gabrielle, before the world called her Coco Chanel. Before the fame, before the fashion, before the revolution, she was just a girl, abandoned, sewing in silence, holding her life together with scraps of fabric and fierce determination. They told her to stay small, to be quiet, to dream less, but she didn't listen. She dared to believe that elegance didn't need a corset, that beauty didn't have to hurt, that a woman could move freely, speak freely, live freely. She gave women trousers, freedom, and breath. She didn't just stitch fabric, she stitched identity. Strength into softness, rebellion into grace. Coco Chanel didn't wait for change. She became the change. From an orphanage to the world stage, she rose, not because someone opened a door, but because she built her own. This isn't just the story of a brand. It's the story of resilience. Of a woman who redefined not just style, but self-worth, who proved that even when the world underestimates you, your fire can light the way. This is the story of Coco Chanel, and a reminder for all of us: you don't need permission to begin. You just need courage and a reason that sets your soul on fire. Let's begin. Before the world knew the name Coco Chanel, there was only Gabrielle. Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel was born on August 19, 1883, in the small French town of Saumur. Her name, ironically, meant happiness, a strange twist of fate for a girl who would come to know hardship more intimately than most. Her father, Albert Chanel, was a traveling street vendor. Her mother, Jean, was a laundress. They were poor, desperately poor. Life was unstable, always one step away from collapse. When Gabrielle was just 12 years old, her mother died of tuberculosis. Within days, her father disappeared, leaving her and her siblings behind. She was sent to the convent of Aubazine, a Catholic orphanage run by strict nuns. The building was gray and cold. The life inside it even more so. There was no luxury, no softness, but there was structure, there was routine, and there was sewing. It was in the orphanage that Gabrielle first learned the skills that would shape her destiny. Under the watchful eyes of the nuns, she learned how to cut, stitch, and shape fabric, but more importantly, she learned to observe patterns, lines, silhouettes, behavior. Everything around her became material for something greater. She began to understand contrast between wealth and poverty, silence and voice, shadow and light. She didn't have words for it yet, but deep down, she was forming her own definition of beauty, one that didn't rely on excess, but on essence. Outside the convent, society had already written her future. Orphan girls were expected to become maids, seamstresses, or wives, quiet lives in the shadows of others. But Gabrielle had no interest in shadows. She wanted to shape the light. When she left the convent at age 18, she began working for a tailor in Moulins. During the day, she sewed. At night, she sang at small cafes and music halls. Her favorite songs were about lost love, longing, and rebellion. It was during this time that she acquired the nickname Coco, perhaps from the song Qui quoi vous Coco dans le Trocadero, or perhaps from a lover who thought the name suited her charm. To some, she was just another pretty girl in a crowded room. But Coco was always watching, always calculating. She didn't perform to be seen, she performed to study. She paid attention to how women moved in their clothes, how men reacted, how elegance could command silence without shouting. She noticed that the women with power didn't wear the most elaborate gowns. They wore confidence, they wore mystery, and she wondered, what would fashion look like if it were designed for women who wanted freedom more than decoration? Her romantic life during this time offered opportunity, but also imbalance. she became involved with Etienne Balsan, a wealthy textile heir. Through him, she entered the world of high society, its salons, its leisure, its rules. But she was never fully accepted. She was the mistress, not the wife, the outsider, not the heir. And yet, she was never intimidated. She watched, she learned, and she took what she needed. With Balsan's support, Coco opened a small hat shop in Paris in 1910. It was called Chanel Modes. Her designs were simple, stark, even compared to the lavish, feathered, bejeweled hats of the time. But actresses began wearing them. Society women followed, and just like that, Coco Chanel became a name. But it was never just about hats. Hats were an entry point, a socially acceptable form of rebellion. Coco had a bigger vision. She believed fashion could liberate women, not restrict them, and she was about to prove it. In those early years, she traveled often to Deauville and Biarritz, wealthy resort towns where she opened additional shops. Her clothing, made from jersey, a fabric once reserved for men's underwear, was unlike anything else. It moved, it breathed, it allowed women to walk, work, live. She refused corsets. She eliminated fuss. She gave women trousers. Her critics called her crude, unfeminine, rebellious. She called it elegance. For Coco, style was not about decoration, it was about definition. About expressing who you were, not who others expected you to be. And in a world still dictated by patriarchal codes of beauty, she dared to ask, why should a woman's body be shaped by anything but her own will? This chapter of her life was not yet one of global fame. But it was one of formation. Coco Chanel was no longer just Gabrielle. She was becoming a voice, clear, bold, unapologetic. And with every stitch, every seam, every garment, she was not only designing clothes, she was designing freedom. By the 1920s, Coco Chanel had already established herself as a disruptor in the fashion world. But she wasn't finished. She was only just beginning to rewrite the rules of how women could dress and live. In a time still haunted by the rigid silhouettes of the Victorian era, Chanel offered something daring: simplicity, comfort, clarity. She once said, "Some people think luxury is the opposite of poverty. It is not. It is the opposite of vulgarity." That belief became her blueprint. Her clothes were stripped of the unnecessary. No bows, no lace, no heavy fabrics. She gave women clean lines, breathable textiles, and clothes that moved with the body, not against it. Her favorite material? Jersey. It was soft, inexpensive, and largely unused in women's fashion. Until Chanel, she took this humble fabric and transformed it into something revolutionary. What had once been reserved for men's undergarments became the fabric of female liberation. At her boutiques in Deauville and Biarritz, women of all classes came to try on something they had never felt before: freedom. Her pieces weren't just garments, they were statements. And each one whispered the same message: you don't belong to anyone but yourself. But perhaps her most iconic contribution to fashion came in 1926. A simple sketch in Vogue changed everything. It showed a black dress, straight cut, minimal detail, and unlike anything women had worn before. It was the opposite of the glitz and extravagance that dominated evening wear. It was elegant, it was bold, it was modern, it was the little black dress. At the time, black was still considered a color of mourning. Wearing it outside of grief was almost scandalous. But Chanel didn't just see a color. She saw a canvas. She believed black could be powerful, mysterious, honest. The dress was an instant success. Vogue called it a sort of uniform for all women of taste. And from that moment on, the little black dress became a symbol of timeless sophistication. But Chanel's work wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about shifting the conversation. Her designs didn't beg for approval, they declared independence. She had lived through the restrictions of poverty, the humiliation of being dismissed, and the condescension of high society. But instead of trying to fit in, she made the world adjust to her. Her name was now synonymous with modernity. Her interlocking C logo was becoming one of the most recognizable symbols in fashion. And her influence stretched beyond clothing, into fragrance, jewelry, and the very spirit of a century. Still, Chanel didn't rest. She didn't look back. There were more boundaries to break. And with every collection, every stitch, every runway, she continued to send the same message. Elegance is not about being noticed. It's about being remembered. And Coco Chanel would be forever. By the early 1920s, Coco Chanel had already revolutionized how women dressed. Now, she would change how they were remembered. In 1921, she launched something unexpected, not a dress, not a hat, but a fragrance. It would become the most iconic perfume in history. Chanel No. 5. Unlike the floral, delicate perfumes of the time, which tried to mimic nature, Chanel wanted something abstract, something bold, something modern. She told perfumer Ernest Beau, "I want a woman's perfume that smells like a woman, not like a rose." The result was groundbreaking. A scent composed of more than 80 ingredients, including a synthetic component called aldehydes, rare and daring in perfumery at the time. The name? Simply, No. 5, not a romantic title, not poetic, just a number. Why? Because it was the fifth sample Beau presented to her. And Coco believed in signs. She launched it on May 5th, the fifth day of the fifth month. Minimalist, mysterious, powerful, and just like her clothes, Chanel No. 5 broke the rules. It wasn't designed to please men. It wasn't soft or sweet or submissive. It was unforgettable. To market it, she didn't rely on department stores. She handed out samples to clients who bought her clothes. The scent lingered on fabric, on skin, in the air long after she left the room. It became her signature, her invisible accessory. When people asked her what she wore to bed, Marilyn Monroe famously answered, "Just a few drops of Chanel No. 5. That one sentence turned a perfume into a legend. No. 5 wasn't just a scent. It was an identity. It was Coco herself, complex, refined, unshakably original. With No. 5, she proved again that true elegance is invisible. That power doesn't need volume, it needs presence. She had given women new clothes, a new silhouette, and now, a new aura. And with that aura, Chanel extended her empire not just into closets, but into memory. Because long after the dress fades, and the runway is cleared, what remains is how you made the world feel. Coco Chanel understood this, and with a single bottle of scent, she captured something eternal: essence, identity, and the bold simplicity of a woman who knew exactly who she was. As Coco Chanel's empire grew, so did the world's unrest. The 1930s gave way to the darkness of World War II. And like many others, Chanel's life was caught in the storm. When the German army occupied Paris, Chanel moved into the Hotel Ritz, a place of luxury that masked the chaos outside. It became both her shelter and her prison. During the war, rumors swirled around her relationship with a German officer. Some said it was a romance. Others believed it was survival. The truth was hazy, shadowed by politics, fear, and self-preservation. For a woman who had built herself from nothing, who had fought for her place in a man's world, being accused of collaboration cut deeper than criticism. After the war, Chanel was arrested and questioned but ultimately released. Still, the public turned cold. The fashion world moved on. And Coco disappeared. She left France. She lived quietly in Switzerland. For nearly a decade, she was silent. No collections, no shows, no Chanel. People believed her story had ended. But Coco Chanel was not a woman who faded. She was a woman who waited. And in 1954, at the age of 71, she returned to Paris, returned to fashion, returned to herself. Her comeback was bold, but the reception in France was lukewarm. Critics dismissed her designs as outdated. Her ideas, they claimed, had passed. But once again, Coco didn't chase approval. She trusted her vision. And America listened. Women across the Atlantic embraced her comeback collection with open arms. They saw what the critics missed: timelessness, comfort, confidence. Her tweed suits, her gold buttons, her signature braid trim, they weren't trends. They were declarations. She had given fashion something new again: maturity without apology. In her 70s, Coco Chanel wasn't reinventing herself, she was reaffirming who she had always been. A woman ahead of her time. A designer who didn't follow fashion, but shaped it. And with every stitch of her comeback, she reminded the world: resilience is always in style. Coco Chanel continued working well into her 80s. Fashion was not just her profession, it was her pulse, her identity, the language through which she told the world who she was and what she believed. Each morning, she rose at 7 a.m., dressed immaculately, and took her usual seat at the Ritz for breakfast. From there, she would walk to her studio on Rue Cambon, where she oversaw every detail: the fabric, the cut, the fittings. She worked with the intensity of someone half her age and the authority of someone who had lived 100 lives. She refused to slow down. In truth, she couldn't. Fashion had changed her life, and she, in turn, had changed fashion. But the work was never done. She believed style was eternal, and therefore, so was the pursuit of its perfect form. Her vision remained intact: elegance, simplicity, strength. She was a woman of contradictions, reserved yet commanding, private yet powerful, minimalist yet unforgettable. She smoked constantly, rarely apologized, and spoke in clipped, confident tones. She demanded excellence not just from others, but from herself. On January 10, 1971, Coco Chanel died in her suite at the Ritz Hotel, the same place she had lived for more than 3 decades. She was 87 years old. Paris fell silent. The world mourned. But Chanel never truly left. Her legacy is stitched into every little black dress, every strand of pearls, every tweed blazer that dares to combine elegance with comfort. Her influence lives in the women who walk with shoulders back and heads high, dressed not to please, but to express. She did not just design clothes. She designed freedom. She taught generations of women that beauty doesn't demand sacrifice, only clarity. That style is not about being seen, but about being remembered. And most of all, that power can be graceful, and grace can be powerful. Coco Chanel gave the 20th century its shape, but her spirit, her vision, her name, they belong to every century. Because true style, like a true story, never goes out of fashion. Long after Coco Chanel's passing, her influence continues to whisper through the seams of modern fashion, through the attitudes of independent women, and through the quiet confidence of minimal elegance. Her story is more than a biography. It's a blueprint. She taught us that style is not a luxury, it's a language. A way of saying who you are without needing permission. A way of moving through the world with intention. She taught us that reinvention is always possible, even after silence, even after scandal, even after the world has moved on. She taught us that simplicity is not the absence of detail, but the presence of clarity. That real elegance is found not in embellishment, but in essence. She taught us to work relentlessly, precisely, passionately, to rise early, to demand more, to never apologize for our standards. And most importantly, she taught us this: you can come from nothing and still change everything. Coco Chanel's life was not perfect. It was messy, complicated, human, but in that imperfection, she found purpose. In that struggle, she shaped beauty. She showed us that resilience can wear a black dress. That power can speak softly. That identity can be stitched, not sculpted. Today, her name lives on not just in perfume or handbags or the double C logo, but in every woman who dares to define herself. Because if Chanel proved anything, it's this: a woman who knows her worth needs no introduction. She simply walks into the room, and the world makes space.